Okay, let's go ahead and get started. We've got a lot of stuff that I want to try and cover tonight. There's a lot I had to delete from the workshop. I've got it down to about 130 slides, so I'm just gonna go. All right, so we got a lot of stuff to cover and a lot of stuff to get after. So a lot of this too, just feel free to listen and take little bits of notes, but there's no way you're going to be able to write everything down. So we're recording it, which means you'll be able to, well, watch the back of your head later, but also be able to watch the talk and be able to review some things and be able to have, like we want to be in the camera. So yes, heads up, you will be, maybe some of you will be on the video. But as we go through that, you will be able to watch the thing later. We'll post it on Facebook, YouTube, whatever, so that you can see it and you'll be able to take some other notes and go a little bit deeper as we do that. So certainly, looks like somebody's trying to come in, and then we'll dig into some stuff. So Heart Strong, obviously steps to preventing heart disease, and so there's a couple of things that I will talk about tonight, and there's some things that I'm not going to talk about. So I'm not talking about crisis situations, right? So I'm not talking about what you do in that environment. This is not the place for that. If you're in the middle of a heart attack, your blood pressure is over 200, things like that, don't come here, okay? Just laying that out there. And I'm not going to try and diagnose or treat any particular disease or things like that. What we're talking about is strategies to build your health. And so ultimately, the healthiest body you physically have is the best preventive direction you can possibly do. And so as we get started with it, for those of you who don't know me, this is an actual picture of me this morning. And you can laugh, it's okay. We'll have some fun here. But obviously that's me, and our mission is to empower longer, healthier lives through chiropractic, as well as the integration through applying the 5 essentials in lifestyle. And so I've got my doctorate in chiropractic, bachelor's degree in human biology, as well as spent additional training in corrective care in a facility that dealt with scoliosis intensive care patients who would fly in from all over the country. And from that perspective, lends to a unique eye and sight into some things that many docs in this area don't have, as well as the training in additional areas of nutrition and fitness and a variety of things there. And I've been able to work with a variety of athletes and a variety of things, which is pretty neat. There's about 400 doctors across North America who work with, let me back up here, a variety of organizations over the years, on and off with some of the Olympic teams, and so much of this stuff has really led to some neat experiences. I've been able to work with a variety of athletes in CrossFit, in strongman competitions, powerlifting, Olympic lifting, as well as some Christian music artists. About a month ago, adjusted over at the Laura Daigle concert, and I've adjusted out of Winter Jam, adjusted Lecrae a few years ago, if any of you know who that guy is. So cool stuff. I've been able to get to know and get to connect with, work with a lot of those things through the organization, but really my heart is for families. And so to be able to take care of families and to be able to have the tools and resources that you can in order to fulfill your passion and in your life, and whatever that is, not necessarily just athletic performance, although the performance mindset is still the same, it's just performance in life, if that makes sense. So that's the direction we want to go. But we're going to start off with mindset, and with that perspective, we're going to talk about knowledge and then attitude in the right direction. So here's an interesting one. So if you see a message on the table, let's say kids eating some alphabet cereal or something, and then mom lays out some letters and it says, "Take out the garbage, mom." If kid comes by and sees that laid out, is he going to think that happened by accident because somebody elbowed the bowl? Probably not. There's pretty good evidence here that there's some sort of purpose for this organization. Does that make sense? And so an organized message implies purpose. And so when we look at the human body, we think of it the same way. The most advanced machine on earth, and they'll tell you that there's no designer. And so it just doesn't make a lot of sense to me when you think about it that way. So kind of framing the mindset back to a complex organization points to design, it points to purpose. Ultimately, the power that made the body heals the body. And so whatever mindset or philosophical worldview you're running from there, I'm coming from the Christian biblical worldview, but ultimately everything the body does has intentionality and purpose. And so things like symptoms and things like diagnoses often are an adapted state of physiology, which means physiology has adapted to create this situation for some reason, and if it's a problematic situation, we want to find that reason or find out what caused the body to have to adapt. It's just a different way of thinking, different way of looking at it. And so let's begin with the end in mind. And so ultimately, this is from Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. So I want you to think for just a minute, what do you want for your later years in life? What do you want? And so you can respond or interact if you want. So as I ask you the question, what do you want life to look like then? Feel free to answer. What would you want?
Healthy.
You want to be healthy? Awesome. So what does healthy look like? Like an actual picture of a scenario. What would be going on that you would know, hey, I'm doing well, I am healthy, I am what I wanted.
Being able to move.
Able to move, so movement, absolutely. Movement, healthy.
Quality of life.
Quality of life. And so I want to hear somebody's vision of what quality looks like. So movement, there's quality, there's health, what else? Any particular thing?
Your mental capabilities.
Mental, absolutely. Be able to have a mindset and be able to have the just clarity and be able to interact and remember things. So mindset there, movement's there. I want to be able to play with my grandkids, or at that time, great-grandkids. I want to be able to go on vacation with them, run around on the beach, play in the playground, climb in the monkey bars. I want to do that stuff. I want to be able to be active. I want to be able to interact with them, play games with them. I want to have enough energy that they're saying, Grandpa, slow down. That's what I want. And so for you, you got to ask yourself, what do you really want? And so what do you want to have? And ultimately, building or reverse engineering your mindset of how to get there. And then so if you start with the end in mind, you reverse, or if you rewind your future. Watch this video. Oh, just kidding. Video's next. We'll go through goals first. So hashtag goals, another actual picture of me writing this. And when it comes down to when you have the vision, you need some action. And so the plan, essentially, number one is the no plan, which isn't a plan at all. Absent a plan, any road will get you there. Number two would be the wrong plan or the wrong direction. And so with all the discipline, money, effort, fundraisers, you name it, you still don't get where you need to go if you're going the wrong way. And so you could have the fastest car, you could have whatever founding behind you, but if you're going west to try and get to Florida from here, you're not getting there. And so the third option here would be the right plan. But then there's a couple of caveats there. You need the right plan, but you also need to start early enough in order to get there in time. Does that make sense? So earlier the better. When would be the best time to pay attention to your health?
Before you get sick.
Before you get sick, definitely. How about as early as possible, as soon as you're born? Or for that matter, better than that, mom takes care of herself and does good things during their life, which influences the genetic expression, which influences pregnancy, which influences delivery, which influences all of that. So ultimately, all of us are born, so we're past that. And so the next best time would be when? Now. Do what you can now. And so ultimately being future-minded, and then you've got to have your big reason why. Now we have a video.
Alright, what do we got?
Just came in, heart attack. 5'9", 300 pounds, 32 years old.
How the hell does that happen? Can I get a,
Maybe developing diabetes. You have to exchange.
Oh yeah.
You had your baby! Watch TV, you know TV.
You can't do this.
Yes, can I get
So future-paced, future-minded perspective is certainly something that we want to do, and sometimes it takes a little bit of a tug of the heart to be able to be willing to make changes and to begin to think about others around us, because stepping into that moment of speaking out and trying to encourage someone, whether that be bringing somebody to an event like this, or whether that be coming to a workshop or a dinner or whatever that is, or encouraging them to come in here in the office, can be difficult, right? I mean, there can be those difficult moments, but ultimately with a bigger vision, it becomes worth it. And so obviously the number one death-causing disease in really the world is cardiovascular disease, heart attacks, strokes, things like that. And so as we get through it, 84 million Americans, about 27% of the population, 1 in 4 have active heart disease. Lifetime heart disease risk is 60% for men, 55% for women. So right about 1 in 2 will end up getting heart disease in our society. And so literally every other person, unless we do what? We change. And so that's what today's all about. So definitely making some change as much as we possibly can. And so here's the myth: heart disease is normal. It's common, but it's not normal with aging. So here's Dr. Dean Ornish. You may have heard of him. He's talked a lot about just moving things to a preventive mindset rather than what it currently is structured as. We talked about our healthcare system being primarily a disease care system, and $2.1 trillion were spent at that time in a given year on medical care, and just so much of that is spent to treat disease after it's already happened. And he says that heart disease, diabetes, and prostate breast cancer and obesity account for about 75% of those healthcare costs, yet they're largely preventable and even reversible by lifestyle changes. So the mindset here, and one of the interesting things that we'll kind of go back into, is the secret killer is chronic inflammation. I'll repeat that. But he did a TED Talk a few years ago. I'll let you watch that if it actually plays.
With all the legitimate concerns about AIDS and avian flu, and we'll hear about that from the brilliant Dr. Brilliant later today, I want to talk about the other pandemic, which is cardiovascular disease, diabetes, hypertension, all of which are completely preventable for at least 95% of people just by changing diet and lifestyle. And what's happening is that there's a globalization of illness occurring, that people are starting to eat like us and live like us and die like us. And in one generation, for example, age has gone from having one of the lowest rates of heart disease and obesity and diabetes to one of the highest. And in Africa, cardiovascular disease equals the HIV and AIDS deaths in most countries. So there's a critical window of opportunity we have to make an important difference that can affect the lives of literally millions of people and practice preventive medicine on a global scale. Heart and blood vessel diseases still kill more people, not only in this country, but also worldwide, than everything else combined, and yet it's completely preventable for almost everybody. It's not only preventable, it's actually reversible. And for the last almost 29 years, we've been able to show that by simply changing diet and lifestyle, using these very high-tech, expensive, state-of-the-art measures to prove how powerful these very simple and low-tech and low-cost interventions can be, like quantitative arteriography before and after a year and cardiac PET scans. We showed a few months ago, we published the first study showing that you can actually stop or reverse the progression of prostate cancer by making changes in diet and lifestyle. And 70% regression in the tumor growth, or inhibition of the tumor growth, compared to only 9% in the control group. And in the MRI and the MR spectroscopy here, the prostate tumor activity is shown in red. You can see it diminishing after a year. Now, there is an epidemic of obesity, 2/3 of adults and 15% of kids. What's really concerning to me is that diabetes has increased 70% in the past 10 years, and this may be the first generation in which our kids live a shorter lifespan than we do. That's pitiful, and it's preventable. Now, these are not election returns. These are the people, the number of people who are obese by state, beginning at 85, 86, 87. These are from the CDC website. 88, 89, 90, 91. You get a new category: 92, 93, 94, 95. 96, 97, 98, 99, 2000, 2001. It gets worse. We're kind of devolving. Now, what can we do about this? Well, you know, the diet that we found that can reverse...
So So as we get through this stuff, really one of the big things to recognize is that we really can make a difference and things can change. We just have to get started. And so as we get through this, the truth is heart disease is common, but is absolutely not normal. And one of the problems we have in our society, as he talks about, it really is the system that we deal with things. Obviously, the healthcare system is part of what leads to that, but that becomes more of a cultural mindset than anything. We're a nation of drugs and technology and testing and surgery, which is great for crisis. By the way, we do have the best healthcare system in the world for crisis, but not for global health. According to the World Health Organization, in one study, they ranked us at number 37. So ultimately not the top, and we tend to spend more than anywhere, and yet every marker of health is rated poorly, and ultimately that's not okay with me. So that's why we do this. And so we need a new system. Thomas Edison said this, the doctor of the future will give no medicine, but will interest his or her patients in the care of the human frame, in proper diet, and in the cause and prevention of disease. So that's really what this is all about. As we get at it, ultimately there are 5 essentials to that. There's the core of chiropractic. We'll talk a little bit about why. There is nutrition. Obviously you've heard you are what you eat. Anybody heard of that? Okay. Basically. Mindset, because that determines what it is that we do. What goes on up here determines our actions on a daily basis. Attitude and then stress can play a big role in physiology in our body. Oxygen to lean muscle, it's fitness, activity, and how many of your cells need oxygen? Anybody? All of them, right? And then we need to minimize toxins. So how much of this stuff makes sense? Well, basically everything makes sense, and so we understand that one. We just need to begin to apply it. So one of the problems we have with heart disease in particular is that often the first sign or symptom can be the event itself. And it's happened, a friend of mine had a heart attack at the age of 34. So I went to school with this guy, and just crazy how young that situation happened for him. Wife, a couple of kids at home, and then thankfully saved his life, but then now he's got to have a couple of stents put in, and then now later on he's got some other complications from things. But literally you can have more than 98% blockage in an artery and feel fine. So we can't just base our life and our health based on how we feel. And so we've got to recognize that we need to test and check things, begin to take care of it. I talked about shorter lifespan for children at this point, which is just craziness. And so we want healthy families. Anybody want healthy families? Yes, of course, we all do. Right. And so as we look at this, there's really no more important time than now because of the generation that is beginning to have an inability to outlive parents scenario statistically. And so children really, as the almost cliche phrase is, children are our future. But I see it every day. When adults come in, when they had problems that began 20, 30, 40, sometimes 50, or even 60 years ago, and so whether they've got the heart disease or cancer type 2, diabetes, Alzheimer's, whatever, these things don't happen over a weekend. They happen a long time in the making, usually without any warning signs or symptoms until it gets really, really deep in. And so again, I want to make sure that we take care of things as quickly and as young as we can. For example, heart conditions are now beginning to show up in children. This was 200 children were autopsied after fatal accidents. And what they found is 10% of kids 2 to 15 already had plaquing the coronary artery. We have 35% at 16 to 20, and over 70% by their mid-20s had some sort of plaquing or scarring in the main artery leading to the heart. So the crazy thing now is just that how often this is happening, but yet also the primary intervention for this is now simply to do the same thing that hasn't historically worked well for adults, and just do the same thing but younger, and start adding more and more cholesterol drugs even as early as age 8 becomes a trend. It just makes no sense to me. Now, so here's the thing, focus on the cause, not just the symptoms. But typically in our society what we're taught to do is whenever you have a symptom, you go to the doctor, they'll run a test, and then write out some sort of a prescription for most everything. Now, the vast majority of at least modern or chronic medications are built around treating the symptom for as long as possible, not around the focus of getting rid of that particular situation. Now, obviously there are crises and times we need those things, but the reality is that's not the majority of what systems have become at this point. And so we just want to do everything that we can to move outside of that. The mindset of it's genetic. My mom had, my dad had, my sister had. Mindset is pretty limiting and is actually relatively inaccurate for about 95 to 90, even 98% of things are not truly genetic. Even though there are genetic markers, there is a epigenetic tendency where mom can pass down some of their genetic tendencies or epigenetic markers down to a couple of generations down the line. However, that does not mean that those genes cannot be turned on or off. It means the expression of those genes, by and large, especially health genes, can change. So Tony Robbins says, not that diabetes, heart disease, and obesity runs in your family. It's that no one runs in your family. Okay, so she's a joke, but it's relatively true. So here's the thing. It's not that it runs in my family. It's the decision that it stops with me. And heart disease is genetic, but you can reverse the curse if you can. So ultimately, the DNA is not your destiny. That's that epigenetic research that I was talking about. That one of the interesting things is that it's about how your DNA is expressed. Because in every single cell, you have 100% of all the DNA you need, but not every cell does the same thing. Your ear cells do something different than your stomach, right? So it's completely different based on how the body responds, adapts, changes, expresses, and there's a lot of complexity to that. But ultimately, we need to be unconventional, and we need to be willing to be a little bit weird when it comes to our health and our society. So when you find yourself on the side of majority, it's time to pause and reflect. Conventional wisdom is not always wise. If you live like most Americans live, you got to be the weird one. You got to be the weird person who does healthy things. Otherwise, you end up being the common one who passively gets sick results. And so I don't want that for anybody. So one of the cool things is that your heart is absolutely amazing. It pumps about 7,200 liters per day, enough to fill up my car about 180 times. That sounds like a giant mess, but that's how the math works. Interesting things that most heart attacks happen on a Monday. And some of you are like, yep, I don't doubt that at all. Christmas Day is actually the most common day of the year that happens. So, craziness. If you were to stretch out the blood vessel system, it would extend about 60,000 miles. Just crazy. So, we have a pretty incredible system that the heart has between all of the different ventricles and everything that we have running everything. So here's some key risk factors we talk about. We're going to go through these in the next, hopefully we can get done within about an hour. High cholesterol, we'll talk about that. We'll talk about blood pressure. Obviously smoking, most people are aware that smoking is not healthy. But did anybody not know that? Okay, just checking. There was a time though that there were commercials like, what cigarette do you smoke, doctor? And so it was a very different society, different perspective back then. But now we understand that smoking's not good. There's some things, I wonder what we'll know upcoming in the future that will be so obvious, we can't believe that we missed it. Inactivity, emotional mental stress, there's being overweight or obese, there's diabetes, and then there's also nerve interference. And so we'll talk about these things. So what is blood pressure? This is the systolic, diastolic pressure, the top and bottom number that you get when you put the cuff on. And then the systolic pressure is when the heart contracts. The diastolic is when it relaxes, and you get that through the artery, typically on the arm. So that's the force, what that is. So we've got the normal standard is 120 over 80. And you've got your pre-hypertension, 120 to 139. Stage 1, 140 to 159, stage 2 over 160, and then hypertensive crisis. Go see a doctor, don't come here. Just saying. But when it comes to lifestyle and making things change, that's what we're talking about. But blood pressure itself can raise risk of stroke, heart attacks, heart failure, kidney failure, blindness, a lot of stuff that's not good. I just want to talk about what that is. So stroke in particular is a couple of types. There's an ischemic, which means you lose blood flow. Hemorrhagic means blood goes out. And so a couple of different types there, and then obviously the portion of your brain that it affects, that portion of your brain, whatever that controls, is what is seen, whether that be an inability to move portions of the face or arm or leg or things of that nature. So let's talk a little bit about cholesterol. Okay, so truths about this. You guys ready? Some of you ready? So here we go. One of the interesting things, fake news. It's a joke, you can laugh, it's okay. But what happened several years ago is a physiologist by the name of Ansel Keys, and he came up with the lipid hypothesis. And the lipid hypothesis basically says that if you eat a diet of saturated fat, that it raises the cholesterol in your blood, and the cholesterol in your blood is what causes heart disease. Unfortunately, either one of those links has not been proven or shown over time when it's actually looked at and studied to be accurate. However, he was well funded, so a lot of things got pushed outside of that. And so we were told to quit eating fats and quit eating cholesterol, don't eat eggs, don't eat bacon, don't eat anything that has those things, even though all of human history we've had those things. So kind of moment to pause. So cholesterol is basically typically broken down between your HDL and LDL. There's VLDL and all the chylomicrons and that stuff. We won't talk about those too much. But ultimately, there's a couple of different types, and it's in your blood. It's a soft, waxy substance. It's actually made by your body in your liver, which means it has a purpose. So just throwing that out there. So it's not inherently evil. So there's the low density and the high density. And the high density is the one that you typically want to raise, and the low density is typically the one that you want to bring down. But cholesterol is needed to manufacture hormones, bile acid, and is actually the building block of vitamin D. The 125 cholecalciferol is vitamin D. So the chole is the cholesterol backbone of that thing. You actually cannot make estrogen, testosterone, cortisone, all kinds of other hormones without cholesterol. So we need to have it. HDL is known as the good one because it helps to clean the arteries and all of that. LDL is known as the bad because it can form plaque and things like that in that area when it gets oxidized. So oxidized is a lot like rust. Iron oxide is rusting of the iron, like in your car. Well, let's talk about some causes here. So any guesses as to what can raise cholesterol? Any thoughts in your blood? Diet in general. Just out of curiosity, what type of diet or what things in diet will actually raise your blood cholesterol?
Fried food, damaged fats.
Fried food, damaged fats, processed types of fats. What about natural fats?
Good for you.
Actually will bring cholesterol levels down. So not all fats are bad. In fact, good fats are very anti-inflammatory and actually very helpful for your lipid profiles and for your heart. So, interesting. What about physical activity? If you move more, you're typically going to have better balance of cholesterol in your HDL. If you have extra weight on your body, if you're typically a little bit older, that very characteristically tends to go a little bit higher. Type 2 diabetes, stress, hypothyroidism is another one, kidney disease, liver disease, some medications, PCOS. There's several of those things that can begin to raise cholesterol because if you think about it, cholesterol has functions that are influenced by anything related to hormones, the immune system, the adrenals, or the liver because it makes it. All kinds of stuff like that directly related. So, the question is, does dietary cholesterol cause heart disease? Not necessarily. So it's the oxidation of cholesterol that causes those things. More people actually have heart attacks with normal cholesterol rather than elevated. And there's actually, during a heart attack, there's actually a higher death rate with lower cholesterol rather than high. One of the interesting things there, as you begin to think about it, cholesterol is part of the body's repair process. So it's a repair substance. Whenever inflammation happens in the body, especially in the arteries, the liver produces more to repair the damage and build it up. It's one of the structural components to cell walls. So it needs to be there. And one of the problems is that cholesterol-lowering medications may lower the cholesterol, but not necessarily the mortality or death rates. So the problem with studies is often does it lower the cholesterol? Guess what happens? Most of the time, it's going to lower the cholesterol. They're not asking the right question of does that extend and enhance quality of life? Not necessarily. So here's another one. Dietary cholesterol. The American Journal of Clinical Nutrition They did a meta-analysis of all the research that they could find. What they found was that there is no link to coronary artery disease or coronary vascular disease, just no real link there to dietary cholesterol. So kind of lost that one. And then of course medications too also have side effects. So we've got liver damage, neuropathy. One of the things to understand about obviously the liver itself is supposed to make cholesterol, so if you stop that it can affect the liver. Your nerves and your brain also have a lot of fat and cholesterol in their own structure, so you don't necessarily want to stop all of that. Severe joint pain, ligament rupture, cholesterol is obviously a part of testosterone, those things, muscle wasting and atrophy and pain. Heart failure, wait a minute, the heart is a muscle, and so we need that. So limits of protection from cholesterol against cancer, that's a vitamin D connection, depression, and then it stops coenzyme Q production, which is a byproduct of making of cholesterol. Coenzyme Q is the bottom step of the TCA cycle for metabolism to make energy, your ATP. So the very last step in that to produce the ATP in your mitochondria, the powerhouse of your cells. Some of you are following, some of you are like, just get to the point. Energy. You need the coenzyme Q there. And so recognize that that ends up being an issue. I already touched on this. Brain tissue makes 60% cholesterol, and then of course the coenzyme Q. So you need coenzyme Q and you need brain tissue. Just a thought. So if the cholesterol does not cause the heart attacks, then it must be the fat of my diet. So we should quit eating avocados and quit eating almonds, right?
No.
Not so much. Here's a meta-analysis on the saturated fat and heart disease over a couple of people, for reference. Just a couple. They found that saturated fat is actually not associated with an increased risk of heart disease, especially when it comes to the right type of fats. When you take a look at things like coconuts, who saw an article about coconuts relatively recently? I think it was a Harvard researcher or somebody that said coconuts are bad for you because saturated fat kills you, essentially, is kind of what they were saying. So not so accurate, but the mindset so often gets stuck because saturated fat kills you, we should avoid it, but then we'd also have to avoid breast milk because it's primarily saturated fat. So it makes no sense to blanket everything without really splitting it and recognizing that there are good fats and there are also bad fats. So natural things, even animal fats, can be very, very healthful in their most natural state possible. So saturated fat, coronary artery systematic review, meta-analysis. Current evidence does not support cardiovascular guidelines that encourage high consumption of polyunsaturated fatty acids and low consumption of saturated. So not so much. So fat intake, risk of stroke, lots of men, lots of follow-up. No evidence found that fat affects those things that develop ischemic or hemorrhagic stroke. Ultimately, here's another medical doctor kind of went out with this one. He was talking about, based on the evidence, that inflammation is the primary cause of heart disease, slowly leading to a paradigm shift in how heart disease is looked at. So for example, in blood analysis, they're going to be looking at something called C-reactive protein. It's a blood marker for inflammation. There's a couple others, but all of the long-established dietary recommendations just have created epidemics of these problems, consequences of which dwarf any historical plague in terms of mortality, human suffering, and dire economic consequences, which means, unfortunately, the improper recommendations here have killed a lot of people, which is really, really sad. However, we can turn the tide moving in a more accurate direction. And just really thinking back to a little bit of logic. Whenever you got a new study or a new thing coming out, check it with a little bit of logic. Check it with a little bit of reason and see if it makes sense or not. And so let's look at inflammation, for example. Let's take a look at an artery here. If you've got good flow, the arteries, let's say to your heart's going to be fine from that standpoint. If you've got swelling in the walls of the arteries, that's going to close down where the blood goes, right? Does that make sense? Regardless of what the blood cholesterol is, if it's swollen, it's going to block flow. Obviously, continue to get worse. This would be an aneurysm. That's where it tends to get swollen out. So your cholesterol could be in perfect ranges, but if it's still swollen, you still have a problem. Or your cholesterol could actually be elevated and then end up with relatively normal or healthy arterial flow. So just recognize that
inflammation is more common than you would think. It can cause stroke, heart attack, and even cancer. It starts as a slow burn inside of your body, and it acts like an emergency unit responding to infection and injury. The tender, throbbing hot spots that may feel uncomfortable are actually part of your body's natural response. It means your immune system is sending the internal signal to launch white blood cells and protein to destroy infection and heal injuries. But if the inflammation lingers after the job is done, or your immune system becomes confused and misfires by accident, what was once your best friend can quickly become your worst enemy. When inflammation becomes chronic, your body's natural defense system takes a turn for the worse by starting a sneak attack on your joints, tissue, and blood vessels, wreaking havoc on all of those areas that were once pain-free. That's when the slow-burning throb becomes a 5-alarm fire. For years, researchers have found that chronic inflammation can be linked to rheumatoid arthritis, multiple sclerosis, and asthma. But the newest and most modern research shows a lot more. Chronic inflammation can very well be at the heart of the life-threatening diseases that we all fear the most: cancer, heart attack, diabetes, and even Alzheimer's.
So much of that stuff is directly linked back to this secret killer, as they're finding, of chronic inflammation. And so as we go through it, here's some causes of chronic inflammation. We kind of go through it. Basically any unresolved problems. So anything that's not dealt with. Can you sweep it under the rug? Don't sweep it under the rug. So emotional stuff, stress, unforgiveness, resentment that you hold inside mentally can create adrenal responses that affect the physical body. Raises cortisol levels, which also raises blood sugar, which raises inflammation. Does that kind of make sense? You guys follow? Okay. Chemical, obviously if we intake a lot of sugar, anything that turns to sugar, especially more processed, refined starches, bread, pasta, grain, stuff like that, especially modern versions of wheat and things that are very different than ancient grains. Processed fats, your vegetable oil, canola oil, margarine, those guys raise inflammation. Other toxins, medications, preservatives, other chemicals, so many things can add to. Anything basically not natural that gets into the body will be responded to as an irritant, as an outside thing, and will mount an immune inflammatory response too to try and get that out of the situation. Then there's the physical, there's the neurogenic inflammation from all the physical injuries or problems or bad posture or whatever the body has. And you can create, and I'll give the technical stuff and then I'll be real simple, retrograde nociceptive afferentation. I'll let you memorize that. Creates inflammatory chemicals or cytokines dumped into the nerve ending in synapse, wherever that goes, whether that be the heart, whether that be the stomach, whether that be the intestines, whether that be muscles, whatever that is. Essentially, if you have a problem in your neck, physically, that can cause neurologic consequence in where that nerve goes. You can have a pinched nerve. Now, we don't necessarily feel that type of nociception. It's not always conscious. And so we want to check and make sure things are aligned well and things are moving well, globally speaking. So let's get into food. We talked a little bit about stuff. Let's get into it a little bit more. Obviously, the secret killer is inflammation. Newsflash, eat butter. Who likes butter? Anybody like butter? Okay. So who likes that you can eat butter? Anybody? Okay, okay. So you can have eggs with your butter. You can actually cook your eggs in butter. Okay, so some of you guys are starting to smile now. Okay. We got a good crowd here. So we like butter. Okay. So if you think about it, these are things that we used to do for generations over a long period of time. This was not something that, ultimately, basically it's God-made foods. It's stuff. Just follow the principles. And so as we walk through that, it shouldn't be ultra complex to eat things. I said you're the good kind of fast. Oh, the avocado drama. So as we go through here, there's lots of different types of diets. It's like, my goodness, which one do I actually do? There's the paleo, the South Beach, the flat belly, the diva, the healthy fast food with soft taco, hard body. Seriously? The wine diet. Okay, some of you are now smiling more. And then there's the beer diet. Wait a minute. Okay. Don't combine diets. That's the Taco Bell, the beer diet. Don't do that. That doesn't go well. That's a bad day. And so part of my own journey is just a recognition from the physical outward expression of an internal pursuit of health, is that things are very, very different than the way that I thought about things whenever I was growing up, and the way that I did things even to adulthood. And ultimately it started with a big Y right there, that little guy, who's not little anymore, by the way. He keeps growing. But little second chin there, extra stuff around the belly. But I realized I had to make some changes. And so once I started to make changes in the right direction, things began to move. And here's an interesting one.
Dinner time on the East Coast in less than an hour. People are going to die.
Sir, we've got a boy on the hotline who says he might know something.
Who is this?
My name isn't important. What matters is that the answer is in the pyramid.
Pyramid? That's ancient stuff you're talking about. Are you sure? Bring up the pyramid.
What is it? What is it for?
We built the pyramid a long time ago to illustrate how much people should eat in the 4 basic food groups.
Sir, we abandoned the pyramid when Michelle Obama got involved.
The pyramid doesn't work. We've already tried it.
It's upside down.
What?
Sir, the pyramid is upside down.
Turn the pyramid upside down.
You can't be serious. That would put butter and fat at the top.
Flip the food pyramid!
This is not FDA approved.
Dinner time on the East Coast in 10 minutes. Now do it!
Sir, we've got a match.
Nutrition is stabilizing.
Get the president on the phone. Tell him to have some steak with his butter.
So the other doc pointed that video out to me, and this is an edited version, by the way. But otherwise, I would have never seen the South Park clip. But hilarious. But the mindset is, what if the food pyramid was upside down? And so what if we were doing things wrong for a long period of time? Because if you look at the obesity trends and all the heart disease trends that have escalated over the last generation, that really is only within that time frame that it's become to the level and the percentages that it is now. So it can't be genetic within literally 40 years. It has to be something that we're doing. And so that's right around the time that the things changed. And so an interesting thing about eggs is they're actually kind of like a multivitamin. They've got lots of minerals there. Everything that a chicken needs for life, which is relatively similar to what we need for life, interestingly enough. When you study embryology, you can actually look at a chicken embryo in a particular stage of development. They look very similar to human embryo development before obviously things change. But it's really, really interesting to start looking at that. So large egg contains all of these wonderful minerals, all of the fat-soluble vitamins, all of the essential fatty acids, all of the essential amino acids that build up proteins. So yeah, eat eggs. So what is a healthy diet? Obviously you want to get rid of the sugar that causes the increase in blood sugar, the things that break down into sugar, which triggers insulin, which causes inflammation. You want to shift into increasing the healthy fats, so nuts, seeds, coconut oil, olive oil, the animals and animal fats in the most natural, original, biologic state that they can possibly be in. So cows should run around and be healthy and eat grass. That's going to be the best format for the nutrient profile for us to have. So low carb shifts the lipid panel in the right direction, lower VLDL, increase the large LDL, decreasing the small LDL, increasing the large HDL. Lots of research on that one. So getting rid of the sugars apparently helps. It's from the paleocardiologist, paleo diet, lots of research here, lowers inflammation, so that's helpful. There's another one, paleo nutrition lowers blood pressure, also helpful, more studies on that. Mediterranean diet also lowers blood pressure. One of the big things that you're finding is they're eating foods that our grandparents would have had. So thinking about it that way, eating things that used to be food before there were boxes and bags of stuff, and windows that we would drive through to get stuff. Eat your greens. Again, another picture of me. Those who eat the most vegetables and fruit have about 1/4 the risk of hypertension. So eat green stuff. More sugar, grain, refined carbohydrates, clarity that needs to be brought down. We talked about cortisol, it's your stress hormone, and insulin. We want to bring that down. 8% increase in hypertension for every sugar-sweetened beverage serving while it's still in there. So that's not good. So our bodies tend to break down into the percentages here. By the way, that's a lot of water. Now, this is my childhood choices. I was about 1% Flintstone vitamins, about 7% pizza, about 20% McDonald's, and maybe 70% Pop-Tarts and Fruity Pebbles. And 1% fruit, no vegetables. And so ultimately that's not a good building block for those things. And so there were a lot of sicknesses and problems that I had growing up, and I was feeding those things, and I had several more injuries growing up than really what I should have, simply because my body was made out of poor nutrition. And so there were other things that happened as a result of that physically, as far as alignment, created sinus problems and migraines and all that other stuff. But ultimately, hydration is a big, big piece of this, because you want to have enough fluid in circulation to thin out the volume of all of the other chemistry, the other proteins and components that you need within your system. You need enough water in circulation to have the right density of blood to not have to raise pressure to get the sludge of inflammation through. If you're trying to squeeze pudding through versus water through, it takes a little more pressure. So guess what your body will do in that environment? Raise pressure, otherwise you don't get circulation. I don't think anybody's going to have pudding in their arteries, but you get the idea. So about 50% of your body weight in ounces. So does that make sense? That's what we should have. And if we're dehydrated, we should increase that, but that should be the maintenance dosage. So free diabetes, purchase a large Coke. Anybody? Anybody? No, thank you. But 120 ounce soda does increase your risk of heart attack by about 30% while it's in your system. So that's partially the sugar, the high fructose corn syrup, but it's also the phosphoric acid. So acid will create irritation and inflammation in your system. We know that acid is not good for all kinds of flesh and things. You get some hydrochloric acid on your skin. How many of you were in like chemistry class? Spilled some acid or something that like not good, right? Chemical burns are bad. Yeah, you just get that off of me now. So it takes about 30 cups of water to neutralize a can of soda. So who's had a soda? Anybody ever had? Okay. Like 3 of you are honest right now. Okay, and then did you follow it up with 30 cups of water? Probably not. So let me encourage you to drink some water. Yeah, so lots of that. And then this will be on video, so you can grab it later. But don't let this kill you. Don't let it do it. So let's talk about pH for a second. Balanced alkaline-acid relationships is key. Right around the 7.3 is neutral. And so it's a logarithmic scale, which means one number is about a 10-fold increase. So from 7 to 6 is 10 times more acidic. And so the body will take calcium out of the bones to restore proper pH. So if you pull enough calcium out of the bones to put out the fires of inflammation, what happens to the density of bones? Density goes down, which means osteopenia and then osteoporosis. So get the pH balanced. That will be much, much more effective than blocking the osteoblastic and osteoclastic activity of the bone via something like a Fosamax. So when the body becomes acidic, arterial walls become damaged, creates inflammation. Where this acid winds up will determine what name you put on a particular problem. Whether you got inflammation in the pancreas, it can create problems with insulin or digestive enzymes. If it's inflammation in the heart, that can create a heart disease of some kind. If that can be inflammation in the colon, that can be a Crohn's or colitis of some kind, if that kind of makes sense. And so wherever that inflammation ends up is where that goes. So conventional beets can do that. So with a lot of modification, additional hormones, additional antibiotics and things like that that we consume via those things. Other toxins that accumulate via the bioaccumulation of what they ate, whether that be genetically modified grains and pesticides, and they consumed a lot of that. We eat that through them. So natural as much as we can. Sugar and refined carbs, I beat that horse till it's dead. Conventional and commercial dairy, just because of the meats conversation as well. Caffeine can cause some acid. Sorry guys. Salts, particularly the table salt, the sodium chloride, because it's very sodium dominant. And so sodium versus potassium balance is a huge thing when it comes to circulation. So sodium, chlorine, and sodium-bound preservatives in processed foods is why a lot of blood pressure goes up from sodium dominance. Not simply due, it's not from a deficient, or excuse me, it's not because of having too much sea salt. Sea salt has a spread of minerals, very different. If you look at like a real salt or a Himalayan pink salt, you look at its breakdown, it's radically different ratios and percentages of things. Alcohol and tobacco, artificial sweeteners, so just because we avoid the sugar doesn't mean artificials are a good idea. And then all medications as well can begin to irritate, anything synthetic, basically. So alkaline, anti-inflammatory diet. There's the nutrition book, and then there's the Align Your Health book with lots of resources. If you don't have one of those, do that. If we need to sit down and talk through your nutrition plan, we can obviously do that in a consult as well. There's plenty of recipes on the website as well as in the books. And then, of course, we do recipe nights that you can begin to engage in the practicality of that stuff. So dig in, have fun. We'll get you any of that resource or access to those things as you need. Beets. How was the lemonade?
Good.
Good.
Good. Some of the balance of flavors you might want to switch up just a little bit. So that's the beauty of recipes. You can add a little bit more lemon if you want. You can add a little bit more stevia or some sort of natural sweetener if you want. Get your ratios to where you like it. But ultimately, beets raise the amount of nitric oxide. So if you're familiar with like racing, they put like NOS, or the nitrous oxide, into the combustion chamber of the vehicle, which explodes because lots of oxygen, nitrogen in there. But the oxygen delivery, you need oxygen in your body, which is very, very helpful. And so this basically helps to lower blood pressure. And in fact, in crisis situations, they'll use a nitro to try and stabilize and get circulation into the heart, try and protect it during a heart event. So beets and beet juice become very, very helpful. They said it will lose or lower your blood pressure at 8 points over a 5 point on average. So beets are very, very helpful for lots of blood pressure and other related things. We're talking about coenzyme Q, and so it may help lower blood pressure simply by scavenging the reactive and oxygen species and augmented concentration available in NO, or nitric oxide. So it's basically like an antioxidant, and it's also a nutrient that produces energy. So if anybody wants energy, okay. How many of you could use some energy right now? Okay. Just checking. And then typically it has a strong blood pressure reduction capability with that. And so obviously we have a coenzyme Q with lipoic acid that you can order. I don't think we have any currently here, but those things certainly are resources that are available. Magnesium supplements help lower blood pressure. One of the interesting things about magnesium is it tends to be relaxing to muscle. And so if you look at the arterial walls, they have muscle that contracts and relaxes, which is part of how blood pressure raises and lowers. That's part of the mechanism there. And so if you have a muscle spasm, magnesium is very, very helpful for relaxing that spasm. Now also, if you have a muscle spasm in the artery, same thing. Muscle spasm in the artery, blood pressure spikes, blood flow doesn't happen, leads to bad things. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So if we have a deficiency there, ultimately that's another thing. You can test that. There's blood measures, and then there's also hair analysis and things like that you can do. We have some of those kits here. If you'd like more information on that, feel free to ask the front desk. Obviously there's a ProMag, it's a citrate, which also helps to relax the colon, which helps to release bowel and things like that. Also very helpful for energy and sleeping, and also has been shown, I saw an article relatively recently, that magnesium is very helpful for easing symptoms of depression. So lots of functions that magnesium does for the body. So a lot of good stuff. The higher the omega-3s, the lower the blood sugar. So interesting there. So the fish oil concept. You want to have a good quality omega-3. How many of you have heard about mercury in fish? That is a potentiality. So you want to make sure that your supplements are high quality and make sure that, well, cheap stuff is cheap stuff, unfortunately, especially when it comes to supplements because they're not very highly regulated. Unfortunately, there was a study done several years ago that found a lot of the just commercialized brands that you would find at like a Walmart or a lot of, or even at like a Walgreens or a GNC or places like that. A lot of the base level supplements didn't even have some of the components that were actually on the label, which is really kind of sad. But that's why third-party independent testing is in all of the MaxLiving supplements and products, just to make sure that what we're asking them to put in there is actually in there. And so make sure third-party testing is available in any supplements that you choose. So optimal ratio omega does exist. Daily Defense is very helpful from an oxidation standpoint. So who's heard of oxidation? I told you once, just a little bit ago, about like rust and things like that. So things oxidate, break down. There's antioxidants, heard about it, like blueberries and vitamin C and turmeric and stuff like that. Very, very helpful. So antioxidants are kind of like the cleanup crew after the oxidation happens. So if you drop an inflammation bomb in your system, lots of debris, right? So the antioxidants come in and clean up all that debris. So very, very helpful from that. And so the turmeric as well as the melon extract in the Daily Defense become very, very helpful. There's a ton of studies on curcumin being anti-inflammatory, very helpful for a variety of things just in our own awareness. So tons of research on that if you want to dig into it. Daily Defense, good quality source. So nitric oxide, things from beets, coenzyme Q, magnesium, and then omega-3s, and then antioxidants like the turmeric and the Daily Defense. So does that kind of make sense? So we look at this, the nitric oxide will dilate the vessels, coenzyme Q, we talked about that one. Magnesium helps to relax the muscles, the omega-3s and the antioxidants help clean up so that the stuff that's flowing through isn't so congealed and inflamed. Does that all make sense? You hit that three-pronged approach, becomes very, very effective for circulation. And yeah, I'll just stop there. Vitamin D has also been linked to a low vitamin D, linked to a higher risk of type 2 diabetes. Obviously, the sunlight connection does a lot of different things. We've been told over the years that we would need to avoid the sun because the sun causes cancer and problems, which is obviously, at this point, I don't know if it's obvious or not, it's obvious to me, just because I've seen the research and the evidence, but ultimately that we need to be in the sun. The sun converts cholesterol in our skin into vitamin D, and so we need to have sun exposure, not burn, but sun exposure. The problem is we're inside an awful lot of our modern life, and then so we end up not having enough of it, so we have to supplement it. About 5,000 IUs daily is what most people need. The RDA is what, 200 according to government at this point? 400. So way, way, way underneath what we really need. And then you can get your blood levels tested. We've got a blood kit that you can actually test. We can do that here and just send it into the lab. Vitamin D supplements lower blood sugar. Lots of research there. Oxygen exercise. Who's ready for fitness? Woo! One person ready for fitness. The best ab exercise is 5 sets of stop eating so much crap. Yeah, 5 sets of that. So lots of facts with physical activity. Obviously, exercise ties back to cardiovascular health. The more physical active you are, the heart has to pump more. And the heart being a muscle, it can grow and get in shape. Relative death risk with fit versus unfit men, this is completely independent of overall body fat percentage, by the way. That it's actually better to be in physical condition even if you still have body fat percentage. Did you Catch that? Being active is way more important than getting the last little bit off. So get moving. Sitting increases risk of death up to 40%. Who's ready to stand up and do some workout? Okay, so one of the interesting things here is that sitting has been dubbed the new smoking. But how many of us have to sit an awful lot just in daily life? We have to at work, we have to in the car, we have to when we drive through and order food. There's all kinds of stuff that we do that's not good for us, but there's lots of reasons there. Just the inactivity and the physical. There's other aspects to that, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. But you're never too old to exercise. There's a study done in 90-year-olds. 8-week high-intensity resistance program, average gain in strength of 174%. Thigh muscles increased size by 9, walking speed increased by 48%. So get at it. So it's a 61-year-old, 75-year-old, 77-year-old. There go the excuses. Get at it. Get at it. Just got to start. Wherever you're at, start building. So move more. Like, okay, Doc, how? So here's a mindset that we want to kind of walk through this to get the most efficiency out of it. Which body is best for health and performance? What do you think? Long distance runner or sprinter?
Sprinter.
Sprinter. Which one has a better muscle mass to fat ratio? Sprinter. Sprinter looks better. This guy kind of looks like sad and I don't know. He's just not happy right there. Running's stressful a long time. It just can't be. So class cardio obviously can help the heart, but it also can raise stress hormones, cortisol, your endorphins, things like that. And cortisol stimulates your appetite, has catabolic properties, which is breaking down of muscle, and increases fat storage. Remember, your body's intelligent. If you burn fat for an hour, guess what your body will store for later? Fat. Body's smart. Decreases testosterone, decreases growth hormone, which is anti-aging. So that's some of the negative sides of that. Now, how do you get the benefits of the positive stuff? You can do physical activity, but doing it in metabolic conditioning or surge training format, which is a high-intensity, short-duration burst. You'll get the same metabolic activity benefit out of the heart, however, not the negative consequence of the hormone response. So you'll actually increase growth hormone, testosterone, at the level that your body's going to produce it, ladies. Doesn't mean you're going to start sprouting extra hair, stuff like that. That's not what I'm talking about. But it's also very time efficient. Like, it really only takes 10 to 12 minutes, sometimes even less. Oh goodness, I've had some nasty workouts that are very, very short. And then I'm laying on the floor sweating, and it's awful, and I'm trying to breathe. And it doesn't take very long. So results of metabolic conditioning: increased growth hormone, testosterone, causes fat to be continuously burned for the next 36 hours. That's an actual picture of me in a kettlebell. Causes muscle building and not muscle wasting. Increases sensitivity to insulin, which helps blood sugar get down, gets the inflammation out of the arteries from what we have. So lots of significant body fat loss in the group of high intensity. Not so much in the moderate intensity, which means put some intensity in your stuff. So here's an example. I think it'd be really helpful for everybody to stand up if you can. Remember, sitting is the new smoking. You don't want to be sitting, so let's do this. So if you have your arms up over your head, take a deep breath, the diaphragm moving, get yourself prepared. And we're going to do 20 seconds of, if you can, squats to whatever depth that you can. If you need to bump into your chair, that's fine. If you want to do baby squats, that's fine. All right, some of you are smiling. You're like, oh goodness, what did I get myself into? All right, so we're going to do 20 seconds. I'm going to watch the, we have no second hand. There's the second hand. Okay, we're good. We're going to go in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, go. Remember intensity, so you want to go down and up quickly. You want to make sure that you're doing, get some explosion in there. Do whatever motions you can. Make sure that you've got whatever capability, put in whatever's intense for you, and you make it happen. So whatever you need to do, you just keep moving. Whether you're squatting, whether you're jumping, whatever you do. That's the longest 20 seconds ever, isn't it? Okay, you guys can have a seat. You guys can have a seat. Now, whose heart rate is up right now? Okay. Some of you are going to be sore tomorrow from that. Now the beauty is, and now my heart's Going. Okay. So the beauty is it doesn't take long, and it does influence heart function. Yeah, and respiratory recovery right now. The biochemistry of the Cori cycle is really trying to recover that oxygen right now. And so very simply as an example, just basic surge plan. Just use a 20-second repeat timer, on, off, on, off, on, off. Take a rest. Do that 3 or 4 times. If you do 3 different sections of this, it'll take you right at 9 minutes. And you'll do an actual 3 minutes of exercise. The rest of it's resting and recovering. It's crazy. So who does not have time for exercise now? No hands. No hands. There goes the excuses, right? You know, how much equipment do you need? Nothing. No equipment. You got the time. Just got to do it. Oh, goodness. Okay, so let's stop for just a second. Because physical activity is not everything when it comes to health. Fitness and looking a certain way on the outside is not necessarily going to create the life that we want. There's more to it than that. You can exercise a lot and still not be healthy. Mike Jenkins literally won the strongman competition at the Arnold Classic in 2012. Very strong. Pull a fire truck, lift 500-pound boulder, hip lifted 2,500 pounds. He, on Thanksgiving, not this past year, a couple of years ago, at the age of 31, passed away right after dinner at home. So there's more to it than simply fitness. Another example, Lance Armstrong, heard of that guy. He was pretty fit. Won Tour de France, yep. A couple times, lots of times. Kind of fit, developed cancer. So there's more to it than simply physical activity. So we got to take a look at that. The Ultimate Warrior. Some of you know what this is. That was one of my favorite wrestlers in the WWF. Anyways, so he passed away of a heart attack. I believe he was 51. Even though he was in amazing shape, younger. Let's see if I can turn off the audio. Take a look at his neck posture there. His head is stuck forward. Like he has almost no neck there. He's got some level of forward head posture. I guarantee you there's degeneration in the neck and the lower neck and the upper thoracic spine there, just based on what I can see in that scenario, which is sad, but one of the things that we understand is that area's nerve supply goes directly to this region. So recognize that one. Bob Harper is another guy, Biggest Loser. He unfortunately, couple years ago now, had a heart attack, basically cardiac arrest. And so according to heart.org, I went ahead and grabbed a quote from them that cardiac arrest is caused when the heart's electrical system malfunctions. And so there's a lot of connection there. Ultimately, even when in good shape, that there's more to it than simply that. So here's the part where I talk about turning the power on. I mean, what controls all functioning in your body is ultimately your brain, and then through your nervous system communicates. You can go months without food, days without water, we can't go minutes without breathing, but you can't go a single second without nerve supply. We know if you separate the brain from the body does not work. And so that's another reason why sitting is the new smoking. That mainstream science has not connected the spine and posture to this whole scenario, but if you're sitting a lot, one of the things that we do know is that it increases the pressure in your spine by 40%. So sitting more increases the pressure in your spine. Guess what's inside your spine? Your nerve system. So this is why the sit-stand desks have become popular.
Yeah.
Stand as much as you possibly can. Here's one from Harvard. Posture matters. Good posture not only protects you against back pain, but also improves your overall health and appearance. Poor posture promotes back pain and can affect the position and function of your abdominal organs. Inhibit breathing, oxygen intake, cause headaches, may also affect mood, which is interesting. So if you look at posture, You want to see head over the shoulders, over the pelvis, over the knees, over the ankles. When you see the head shifted forward, it's a very simple way to test if there's any developed postural problems there. Obviously, something shifted to the side or something forward anywhere is going to be a problem. So a very simple way to take a look at that. Some of you are sitting up in your chairs now. Here's an interesting study. They said that shrinking 3 centimeters increases risk of heart attack by 68%. How do most people shrink as they age? In posture and in degeneration. So you degenerate the height in between the bones, guess what you close down? The space for neurology, for the nerves. So vagus nerve is pretty neat. This is not Las Vegas. This is the 10th cranial nerve that comes out of your skull. Quick, name these structures. All right, no anatomists in here. Okay, those are your vertebrae. But this nerve basically carries lots of functions back and forth between the brain and a whole host of the visceral structures inside your abdomen. So pretty much the whole upper half of your organs, as well as diaphragm, so many other things, comes up through the neck, back up underneath inside the skull to the brain stem. Actually influences something called blood pressure, your baroreceptors of the heart. That's one part of that. So interesting connections there. So the sensory and sensations of organs, motor movements of the organs supplied, slows heart, increases peristalsis of the gut, a whole lot of stuff there. If you take a look at the actual branch, comes down, spreads out through here, comes down, connects to all kinds of stuff in your abdominal cavity. And so your vagus nerve can be influenced with your alignment of motion in the upper neck. It's interesting when you start looking at that, or you take a look at the nerve supply from a sympathetic nerve system as well, that comes out of the, between T1 and T4, runs into the plexus. This is obviously not actual anatomy, that is a drawing, but T1 to T4, the sympathetic chain, they break down T1 to T4, and then 5 to 8 tends to break down into a separate plexus. And so when it comes together and then heads out, this would be the upper thoracic spine, where those nerves influence some aspects of the function of the heart. Whereas the parasympathetic, that's the vagus nerve, and it influences things over here. And so that's where the SA node is, and then the AV node is the sympathetic driven speed your heart rate up type of trigger. The SA node is essentially the natural pacemaker, but it's kind of the slowing down pursuit of the nerve system side of things. And then the autorhythmic nature of once it's triggered, then you've got contraction, and then it flows like dominoes of a contraction all the way down, as long as the electrical signaling also happens. So here's some techniques to boost the parasympathetic tone. You can gargle stuff. That doesn't mean you need to do it right now. Singing, humming, moving your diaphragm. Ooh, cold water plunge. Anybody do the polar plunge? Okay. Yeah, that's awful, but it's awesome for you. Abdominal massage. Ultimately releasing all of that, releasing the diaphragm will help to stimulate. Chiropractic, obviously can influence the nervous system. Any sort of body work. Acupuncture can. Boosting nitric oxide, so like beet juice, can help with parasympathetic tone. Chewing gum, the mastication of that, and just the physical action of doing those things, moving the jaw and the muscles around. There's also a low-level laser that you can do on the vagus nerve itself. So de-stressing, resting, simplify your schedule, breathe to relax, do some physical activity. It's a huge stress buster. Do some sort of meditation, shifting perspective, focusing on gratitude and the good things, as opposed to simply the way that things go in your particular day can be huge. There's an interesting study about chiropractic lowering blood pressure. They adjusted the atlas, the top bone, and they found that it created an effect of a blood pressure change of a 17/10 drop. In particular, when you have a misalignment there, it can influence the vagus nerve's tone and function. So interesting. You got to check the vagus, you got to check the atlas and the skull and make sure they're aligned well and moving well, because you can't always feel that. So make sure you check on that stuff. Any sort of chronic pain also raises blood pressure. There's that neurologic consequence and inflammation that happens from all the chemical names that I named earlier on inflammation, but so much of that. So if you know somebody who's dealing with some pain, they should probably address that rather than just suppressing symptoms, which is ultimately the most common thing, or simply ignoring it like a lot of us do, like I did with a lot of my own issues for a while. Here's an interesting one. There was actually a test here that's not actually a pacemaker, but that was a that was a sensor implanted to track the heart. But an interesting thing that you can probably see there in the thoracic spine, in the mid-back, the bones of the vertebrae, does that look straight or does that look curved to you? It's curved. So there's guaranteed going to be some level of neurologic interference to the heart, which would make sense why they would need to monitor it for its electrical activity. Interesting. So the only, really an easy way to check that would be to take an X-ray, measure stuff. Here's an interesting one. Henry Windsor did some autopsies. This was a long time ago, but ultimately what he found, he did a lot of autopsies, and he found that with heart disease, all 20 with heart pericardium conditions had T1 to 5 misaligned, somewhere in that area. All lung disease, T1 to 4. All stomach disease, T5 to 9. Liver disease, T5 to 9. Gallstones, T5 to 9. Pancreas, T5 to 9. Spleen, kidney, prostate, uterus. The interesting connection is the vertebrae curvature seems to correlate directly with the nerve supply to that particular organ or group of organs. So if you have a misalignment or an area that's not moving in the spine, it will directly influence the health of the organs it's connected to. And so this, again, is not just a chiropractic idea. This is basically, so 3 different studies. He dissected 75 humans, and he did some cats as well. Basically 221 diseased organs. Definitely relationship between there and the spine. Found almost 100% correlation between minor curvatures, as he called them, and then related to the nerves in those segments. So scientifically speaking, should we invest in making sure that the spine and nerve system is moving well, is aligned well for ourselves and for our family? That makes sense. Absolutely. And so doing that, so how early do you think you can have a misalignment? Birth, right? As soon as things start. Just the birth process itself, you kind of see even in the diagram, kind of the torque of the neck there that can happen. And unfortunately, it's become more common with more interventions and more inducement and more epidurals and things like that that just change the natural delivery mechanisms, and then even the methods of laying on the back instead of being vertical and then squat with gravity assist. Just lots of different factors tend to influence mechanically the ability to be born vaginally as well as doing things naturally. So then, of course, there's the cumulative effect of all the other stresses throughout life. Anybody deal with stresses? Yes? Okay. The fact that I'm still talking is probably a stress. So certainly that, and spinal subluxations, whether you've lost some of the curve in your neck, which can be found by an X-ray, creates what's called a pathologic tension of the neurology. And that the interesting thing is that the brain and then the vast majority of the cord has no pain perception, which means you don't feel those things. However, it affects something, if that makes sense. So here's an example. You can probably tell there's not a lot of curve here. Not good. He's about ready to have sinus surgery, actually, believe it or not. If you take a look at the neurology here, where do you think that probably goes? Right there. And then, of course, the vagus nerve out through here affects some other stuff. But then to be able to have from here and be able to correct its alignment is going to open up. Take a look at how much pressure comes out of there. Like, it's just crazy how much that opens up. And then if you relax the neurology by restoring the natural curve there, his life will be radically different. He was able to actually avoid surgery, got rid of the sinus infections, was doing incredibly better. And then so many other things began to change. I think vertigo went away, all kinds of stuff that didn't realize was even associated with this, other than he had some neck stiffness from an accident, you know? And so finally correct these things and then maintain the spine throughout life as much as you possibly can. So if you have any particular symptoms going on, then that's a warning sign. It's like the check engine light in your car. You want to make sure that you find and address those things to the best of your ability. And so if you haven't had those things looked at, my encouragement is to do it. Go through history, consult, do an exam, do some thermal imaging. We'll go ahead and do x-rays if we need to do that to actually, if there's any signs that there may be something going on. If you haven't done that, we'll do it. And we'll do that for just $25, which is crazy cheap for any sort of x-rays or exam. So if you want to take advantage of that, just go ahead up front and do it. So let me just kind of summarize the vast majority of things here. Get your power turned off. Ultimately, the power, the electrical connection from the brain to the body needs to be communicating well. Increasing your dietary fats, decreasing or eliminating your sugars and grains. Your key supplements are going to be things like beets, beet juice, beet powder, coenzyme Q, magnesium, your omega-3s, and your daily defense, which has the turmeric and the melon extract. The mindset, be cause-focused with a can-do mindset in clear positive directions. Do some sort of surge training in your fitness, and then avoid toxins where you can. Does all that kind of make sense? Bless you. So much that we can do, and if we were to do each of these things, how radically different would life be in the next year, 5 years, 10 years? Just imagine, we get just a little bit better at applying these things every year, life will be radically, radically different. And imagine how different the next generation will be if they learn these things young. How much could we avoid? So much. And so we have next seminar is going to be at the Chateau. It's going to be all about the immune system. So any understanding how that works and how you can influence anything from a cold to flu to cancer can be influenced by how well the immune system and lasting immunity's strength can be. Got some info in your packet there. And I know I went a little bit long tonight, but then there's so much stuff that we can learn, so much stuff that we can do. If you have any other questions or you have any other things that we need to consult about or talk about, we can certainly do that.